brother and a sister. My brother is the blonde that runs across the field in the beginning. I actually have a part in the movie also. I play the first child that runs inside, crying, "Grandpa, Grandpa, we saw the top monster." And it is my real mother that is in peeling potatoes and telling us to, "Shh, you'll wake your grandfather." So when that scene was shot, I was in the 3rd grade. I was at school, and my uncle, Steve, who was my mother's little brother, and played also the creature, he was one of the 3 people that played the creature, came to pick me up early from school. They called me out of class, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was for, but my father had an advertising agency prior to making movies. So I was used to sitting for him for, we would come home from school or whatever, he would pull us aside, take a picture, and then use that for a State First National Bank ad or a Bennett's department store ad. So our entire family was used to working as his model or kind of in a family setting. So when I was pulled out of class, they told me that they needed me to, I was going to be in one of the scenes for my dad's movie. My only question was, are we going to see the monster? Are we going to see him? Are we going to see him? And my uncle was very evasive when I got there. I don't even remember really my father coming around. I'm sure he was trying to stay away from me because that was the question I was going to ask. Are we going to see the creature? And he wanted a genuine response from me. So as we went out into the field, we are at the genuine screen. The creature jumps out. I believe that day, I'm not sure if it was Keith, I actually think it was probably my Uncle Steve, and that was why he was so sullen when he picked me up from school, because he knew that he had to go over and put on that costume that was so hot. Anyway, my dad, prior to making movies, had his advertising agency, Pierce Advertising, which was on State Line in Texarkana. And he also had a kiddie show, which many of you will know, called the Laugh-A-Lot Club, and he was Mary Chuckles. So it was very popular with the kiddie set that I was traveling through. As a kindergartner and 1st and 2nd grader, I would start to school, and people would run up to me, kids would run up to me and say, "Is it true your dad's Mary Chuckles?" And then they'd run away. So before he was famous for his movies, he was famous with the kindergarten set. So he made his mark by asking kids to come up to his board. He was an artist, and kids would make marks on the board, trying to trick him. His mission was to create a cartoon face, and if you stumped him, you would win a bicycle. And the entire time that he was there, I don't think anyone ever won the bicycle. There was some kind of trick that kind of went to the grave with him. So when Bobby Creek was made, the first time I remember hearing about the film, I was at school, and it had hit the newspapers, the Bobby Ford incident, and all the kids at school were talking about it, and there was some kind of creature, and they were calling it a monster, and in my 2nd grade mind, monsters didn't exist, and what in the world were they talking about? I never mentioned it to my parents. I just thought it was kind of gossipy. Not long after that, we lived at the Orleans Apartments in Texarkana, Arkansas. And I remember being at the top of the stairs and hearing my father tell my mom he was going to make a movie about this Bigfoot in South Arkansas. And my mother surprisingly said, "Oh, I think that's wonderful," and was very supportive. The next thing I remember, he was sitting on the floor, and he had a camera and all the lenses and parts and batteries all around him with his instruction manual, and he was putting the camera together. So the film was shot, I believe my scene was shot in the spring. The film premiered August of '72 at the Perot, which at that time was called the Paramount. There were 2 theaters in Texarkana at the time. the Oakland Cinema, which showed all the first run big movies of the day. In '72, The Godfather won the Academy Award. Cabaret, Design Adventure, Deliverance. There were some pretty, hefty films that year. The Legend of Iron Creek was the 9th highest grossing film of '72. Of course, it was an independent, one of the very first independents, and it was breaking box office records across the country as it rolled out. Surprising Hollywood a great deal, I'm sure. Recently, I was told that Francis Ford Coppola is interested in a bio on my dad, and at first I was a little shocked. The Godfather himself would be interested in Charles B. Pierce, and then I realized that the year that he did The Godfather was the same year, and if he is anything like my father was, he would religiously check those Hollywood Reporter and Variety box office revenues and see where his movie was, whether he was going up or down, and how well he was doing against other films that had been released around that time. So I'm only guessing that Francis Ford Coppola was doing the same exact thing. And I would venture to guess that my father probably made quite a bit more money that year than Coppola, only because he was receiving a nice chunk of it. When he decided to do the movie and was close to being finished, he started looking for a distributor, and Hollywood hung up on him. Sam Arkoff in particular, I remember him saying to me that he took great pleasure later on when he did sign with Arkoff for The Town of Dreaded Sundown, and that, I think there were 3 movies in that deal with Arkoff. But with The Legend of Iron Creek, he did not have a distributor. He was doing it himself. It's called four-walling, was what the procedure technique was. And that is where you rent the entire theater, you pay for all of the overhead, and then you take the box office when it's over. So it was very high risk and a situation, one that I just am going through this weekend. It's a high wire kind of act, and it's not for the faint of heart. I cannot even imagine how my father and even Mr. Ledley would have felt in those weeks leading up to the original premiere. So as I said, the Perot was then called the Paramount. It was in great decay, and the Oakland was showing the first run movie of the day. My father calls, the Paramount had been closed actually because of decay, and so they agreed to open it so that he could show his movie. He wrangled up all his relatives and friends, and we went in and we cleaned the theater the days before. The gunk on the theater floor was so thick that your feet would stick and your shoe would want to stick to the floor. So during that time also, the balcony was closed. So I believe last night we had as many members as probably at the original premiere, which was very exciting. So, especially after 45 years, or 50, almost 50 years. So he did not have the distributor. He gets a second print, and it had actually been a reject. I think there was some kind of flaws in it, but he works out some kind of deal. I don't know if they gave it to him, but he gets a second print and he puts it in Shreveport at the Strand. And so in Shreveport it does the same thing. It's a big success, lots of people talking about it, and lots of ticket sales. He rolls out a third print, it goes to El Dorado, and a fourth in Monroe. By that time, my father was, in the beginning, he would go every night. We would drive to Shreveport, and he would pick up the receipts for that night's showing, having to wait about 3/4 of the way through the film until at a certain point in the movies they would release the funds. Wouldn't release the funds prior to that in case someone wanted their money back. So we would wait there, and sure enough, they would give him the money. He would put it into a brown paper sack, which I have found, I have heard since then that large sums of money are transferred in brown paper bags, but that's what he would do. He bought a gun, he bought a Corvette, and he stuck his 3 kids and the gun under the seat. My mom would ride shotgun, and we would drive every night to Shreveport. to pick up these box office receipts. As it grew bigger and my father, his net worth started to go up, he had other people that would trusted. Mr. Ledwell's accountant would go, and then Steve Ledwell, Mr. Ledwell's son, would go. He told me that Steve Ledwell told me that on those initial runs, Texarkana, The Strand, El Dorado, Edmond Road, those would be $40,000 that he would pick up each night and then drive them home. Those numbers equated today are significant, adjusted for inflation. So it was a huge success. They were splitting the money between Mr. Ledwell and my father. And my mother had rented, she'd been married to my father for quite a while and never owned a home. So she was putting pressure on my father to go to the bank and get a mortgage for their house. On the day that he had set to go to the bank, there was a knock at the front door at 926 Grand in Texarkana, and my dad answers it, and it's Joy House. Joy House was a distributor and movie theater owner that he owned Joy Cinemas and many other theaters, and it turns out that he owned the theaters that my father had been four-walling from. Steve Ledwell later told me that Mr. Houghton knew exactly how much money to offer because he had the numbers and saw what the movie was doing. It also, for years, held the title for greatest concession stand sales. And we figured that it was because the kids were screaming and the popcorn was flying and the Cokes were being spilled, so they bought more. So